The admission came unexpectedly, slipped into a conversation that was never meant to go there. During what was supposed to be a light discussion about demanding filming schedules, Sam Heughan paused and chose his words more carefully than usual. He didn't smile, didn't deflect, and didn't turn it into a joke. Instead, he admitted that he had been too exhausted during some of the most intense scenes he had filmed alongside Caitriona Balfe, and the room shifted immediately. It wasn't the phrase itself that shocked people. Actors talk about fatigue all the time, especially on long-running productions. What made this different was the way Sam said it, with no attempt to soften the implication. His tone suggested not momentary tiredness, but a deeper, cumulative strain that had been building quietly over years. For a show known for its emotionally charged and physically demanding scenes, the confession landed heavily. Those moments between Sam and Caitriona have long been described as effortless, intense, and deeply convincing. Fans assumed that level of chemistry came naturally, or at least comfortably. Hearing that exhaustion had crept into those scenes challenged that assumption. Sam did not frame his comment as a complaint. He was careful not to assign blame, not to imply tension, and not to suggest a lack of professionalism. Instead, he spoke about limits, physical, emotional, and mental, that become harder to ignore over time. The honesty of that framing made it difficult to dismiss. Long-term productions create a unique kind of pressure. The audience expects consistency, intimacy, and emotional escalation season after season. Actors are required to revisit the same emotional spaces repeatedly, often under tighter schedules and higher expectations. Fatigue in that environment isn't dramatic, it's inevitable. What unsettled listeners was how long Sam implied he had been carrying it. This wasn't about one difficult week or a single demanding shoot. His wording suggested endurance, the kind that becomes habit before it becomes visible. By the time exhaustion is acknowledged, it has usually been present far longer than anyone realizes. The mention of intimate scenes added another layer of complexity. These moments are not just physically taxing, but emotionally exposed, requiring trust, timing, and vulnerability. Performing them while depleted changes the experience entirely, even when everything still looks seamless on screen. Sam's admission hinted at the cost of maintaining that illusion. Caitriona's role in this context remained unspoken, but deeply felt. Sam did not describe conflict or discomfort between them, and he made no suggestion that their dynamic had suffered. If anything, his words implied respect for how carefully those scenes had been handled despite the strain. That distinction mattered. What fans heard was not weakness, but humanity. The idea that even the most polished performances are sometimes carried by people running on empty reframed how those scenes might be understood. Chemistry, it turns out, can coexist with exhaustion, but not without consequence. The timing of the admission raised questions. Why speak now, after years of silence on the subject? Why acknowledge exhaustion when expectations for the show remain so high? The absence of an obvious trigger made the moment feel deliberate, as if Sam had reached a point where honesty mattered more than maintaining appearances. He didn't expand on specifics, and that restraint was telling. There were no anecdotes, no behind-the-scenes revelations, no attempts to dramatize the experience. By keeping it general, Sam avoided turning a personal limit into spectacle. The focus stayed on reality, not headlines. Industry observers recognized the subtext immediately. Long-running series often demand more than they admit, especially when success depends on maintaining emotional intensity. Actors are praised for commitment, but rarely asked how sustainable that commitment is. Sam's words quietly challenged that imbalance. What followed was a pause, both literal and figurative. The conversation moved on, but the admission lingered. Viewers replayed the clip, searching for meaning not in what was said next, but in what had already been revealed. Exhaustion, once named, changes how everything before it is seen. By acknowledging the struggle, Sam did something unexpected. He disrupted the idea that chemistry alone carries a performance. He reminded audiences that behind every intimate scene is labor, repetition, and endurance that doesn't always show. The honesty wasn't dramatic, but it was destabilizing. And that was only the beginning. Because once exhaustion is admitted out loud, the question is no longer whether it exists. The question becomes what it has already cost, and what it might still demand if left unspoken. The admission didn't land as an excuse. It landed as a confession that came too late to be softened. When Sam spoke about exhaustion, he wasn't talking about a single day on set or a bad night's sleep. He was describing a build-up that had taken years, layered beneath professionalism and silence. What made the statement uncomfortable was how ordinary it sounded. Long hours, demanding schedules, emotional scenes filmed repeatedly from different angles. None of that was new, and none of it was shocking on its own. What shocked people was hearing Sam admit that, at some point, his body and mind stopped responding the way they were supposed to. The hot scenes were never just physical. They demanded emotional presence, precision, and control under intense scrutiny. Every movement was choreographed, every expression monitored, every pause judged. Performing that level of intimacy while exhausted turns vulnerability into labor. Sam acknowledged that the struggle wasn't about chemistry. It wasn't about discomfort with Caitriona, nor a lack of trust between them. In fact, he made it clear that their working relationship was built on mutual respect. The issue was endurance, not connection. Over time, fatigue changes how the body responds. What once felt natural begins to require effort. Concentration slips, recovery slows, and the margin for mistakes narrows. In scenes where intimacy must appear effortless, exhaustion becomes impossible to hide. Caitriona's role in this dynamic was unspoken but significant. She had felt the same pressures, even if she didn't articulate them publicly at the same moment. Matching emotional intensity when one partner is drained requires adjustment and restraint. That unspoken negotiation became part of their process. Sam admitted that pushing through became the default. There were days when rest would have helped more than rehearsal, but schedules rarely allow that luxury. Saying yes, again and again, felt easier than slowing everything down. Exhaustion, once normalized, stops feeling like a warning. What changed was his willingness to name it. By saying, "too exhausted," Sam removed the illusion that actors operate separately from physical limits. He acknowledged that professionalism has a cost when it ignores sustainability. That honesty disrupted the fantasy surrounding those scenes. The reaction was mixed but telling. Some fans were surprised, others uncomfortable, and many quietly empathetic. The admission forced a shift in how intimacy on screen is understood, not as endless passion, but as carefully maintained performance. The glamour faded just enough to reveal the work beneath it. Sam emphasized that the struggle wasn't permanent. It was situational, tied to specific moments when demands collided without pause. Rest, recalibration, and clearer boundaries made a difference. But reaching that point required acknowledging the problem out loud. What lingered after the admission was not scandal, but perspective. Audiences began reconsidering what they expect from performers over long-running productions. Intimacy does not renew itself endlessly without cost. It has to be protected, paced, and respected. For Sam, speaking up altered the balance. It allowed conversations that hadn't been possible before, conversations about limits rather than expectations. That shift didn't weaken the work, it stabilized it. Sustainability replaced silence. The scenes themselves didn't lose meaning because of the admission. If anything, they gained context. Knowing the effort behind them reframed what viewers were watching. Performance became human again. In the end, "too exhausted" wasn't a complaint. It was a boundary drawn after years of crossing smaller ones. Sam didn't reveal weakness, he revealed awareness. And that awareness changed how the story behind the scenes would be told from then on.